Very good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone who's joining from all over the world for this online policy roundtable. My name is Tisha Khilare. I'm a senior research associate at the Council for Strategic and Defense Research. I'll be your host for today, and I'm delighted to welcome you all for the Chowtrack Policy Roundtable on Indo-Pak Trade Impasse, Implications for the Region. This roundtable is being conducted as part of the economic connectivity vertical of the Chowtrack Dialogue. The Chowtrack is a track 2 dialogue between India and Pakistan. It looks at issues of economic connectivity and regional prosperity in order to foster trust and to enable collective action. We are very fortunate to have with us a distinguished panel of experts. Please allow me to introduce them and the chair. First up, we have Professor Sanjay Kathuria. He's a senior visiting fellow at the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. He's also an adjunct professor at the Georgetown University and visiting faculty at the Ashoka University. Previously, Professor Kathuria was the lead economist for the World Bank and was a leading voice behind the bank's One South Asia initiative. Prior to joining the World Bank, he was a fellow at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations in New Delhi. Professor Kathuria writes frequently on economic connectivity in the South Asian region. We're also joined by Professor Nisha Taneja, who is based at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations in New Delhi. She has experience of over 30 years in policy-oriented research in the areas of trade and trade facilitation. Her regional focus has been on South Asia. She has also worked as a consultant for the United Nations, for the World Bank, and for the Asian Development Bank. Professor Taneja is a leading expert on Indo-Pak trade issues. We're also delighted to have with us Mr. Muzammil Shinwari. Mr. Shinwari is a founder and executive director of Afghanistan-based Organization for Economic Studies and Peace. Previously, Mr. Shinwari has held several high-level government positions, including senior advisor to the chief executive of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, acting minister of Commerce and Industries, and deputy minister of Commerce and Industries of Afghanistan. Mr. Shinwari has also served as chief trade negotiator for Afghanistan, and he has led Afghanistan's accession process to the World Trade Organization and negotiated the Afghanistan-Pakistan Transit Trade Agreement, APTA. We're also joined by Mr. Uzair Yunus. He's a visiting senior policy analyst for South Asia at the United States Institute of Peace. He previously served as director at Albright Stonebridge Group, where he focused on developing advocacy strategies for companies and nonprofits operating in South Asia. He earned his MA in law and diplomacy with a concentration in economic policy and South Asia from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Mr. Yunus also hosts the Pakistonomy podcast and writes on Indo-Pak trade. And finally, the chair for today's roundtable is Professor Amita Batra. Professor Batra is a professor of economics and currently the chairperson of the Center for South Asian Studies, School of International Studies, JNU. Professor Batra was senior visiting fellow at the Department of Political Economy, University of Sydney in 2018, and the first holder of the ICCR Professorial Chair in Contemporary Indian Studies at the University of Edinburgh in 2013. She's also been visiting professor at IIM Ahmedabad. Before I hand over the proceedings of today's roundtable to the chair, I'd like to make some housekeeping announcements. First, of course, each expert will have 10 to 12 minutes to address the topic of today's discussion. After we've heard from all panelists, the chair will open the floor to audience questions. To raise a question, participants can type their queries in the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your Zoom window. Alternatively, you may choose to type in the chat box as well. If you do choose that option, please mention who your query is addressed to. We welcome comments from the participants as well. If you wish to make a comment, please click the raise hand icon and I will bring you on the screen during the Q&A round. Okay. I'd now like to welcome the chair for today's panel, Professor Amita Batra, to introduce the topic of today's discussion and start with the proceedings.
Thank you, Tisha. I think we are talking today, or we're meeting today to talk about India-Pakistan trade and connectivity issues. And I think there are about 4 of these questions that have already been probably circulated to the experts, but for the benefit of the participants, I will read them out again. That's what the focus of the discussion and this roundtable today is going to be. This is on what has been the impact of suspended trade on trading communities and other stakeholders of Indo-Pak trade. What steps need to be taken to resume trade between India and Pakistan? How can trade resumption aid in enhancing regional economic recovery post-COVID-19? And what avenues can be explored for regional economic cooperation between India, Pakistan, and India, Afghanistan? Of course, these are 4 questions broadly that each one of the experts today would probably like to focus on, or probably one of these. I will not be addressing this, a single question to each of you experts. I think you're free to talk about each or all of them, Before I proceed forward to the panelists, I think I would also like to pose a couple of points here, which I think we can dwell upon, or we can probably bring them later after the comments have been made by the experts, which is 2, basically 2 points that I would like to bring here. One, of course, is in terms of India-Pakistan trade that has been discussed many times. We've talked about potential for a long time now, and we all know that as far as the actual and potential is concerned, there has been a huge gap as far as these 2 countries are concerned. It is also known, that as far as trade suspension this time is concerned, we are in unprecedented times, both as far as the pandemic is concerned, which requires probably unprecedented steps as far as trade is concerned. Trade as a means to development, as a means to growth, as a means to getting out of the pandemic as well, But also in terms of the fact, you see, that as far as suspension of trade between these 2 countries is concerned, this is not the first time. This has happened earlier. We've gotten out of it, So I think what's important for us to focus here is the fact that, yes, it's been there before. Yes, we've gotten out of it. How do we do it this time? And how do we take it to a higher level this time, given the kind of situation that we are in, 2, I think I would also like to say, that maybe at some point one should also bring in the fact that as far as relationships, bilateral or difficult bilateral relationships are concerned, that is something that has also been known and also prevails among other bilateral pairs in the world, And many pairs in the world, at hand examples as far as neighboring ASEAN is concerned, East Asia is concerned, have sidetracked the political hostilities and moved on to economic betterment as far as bilateral relations are concerned, economic relations are concerned, particularly using trade for the benefit of both partners, trading partners. Can we move towards that kind of a situation? Can we think of that as far as India-Pakistan is concerned? Can we think of extending, the role that we play for each other and in terms of third country connectivity to benefit the population at large of this region, I think these are important questions that we must at some stage deal with and probably try and find answers to, I will now hand over to the first panelist. I'm going to take the panelists in terms of first the multilateral view. I think, Sanjay, even though former World Bank, but I think you will bring forth the multilateral view and then move on to the Afghanistan, then Pakistan, and then the host country, India, will move on to Nisha. Over to you, Sanjay, first.
Thank you very much, Amita, and thank you to CSDR for inviting me for this very important session on a topic which I think affects the life of people in the region much more, I think, than the everyday person realizes. Because this relationship between India and Pakistan is treated mostly in sort of political terms. So I welcome the questions you just raised, Amita. And I will actually address at least the second one of them. Actually, I will address both of them. So let me start by, I'll make a few points. Let me start with the big picture, which I think this panel knows very well. I'm delighted to be in the presence of an August panel like this. But I think just for the benefit of other listeners, so the big picture, as we all know, is the potential of trade between India, Pakistan, and indeed between Afghanistan, India, and Pakistan, the tripartite relationship. So India-Pakistan potential is huge. It is when we had so-called normal trade relations pre-2019, trade was roughly of the order of $2 billion, formal recorded trade. But the World Bank, in our study, when I was there, we recorded the potential was $37 billion. And that was just trade in goods, which barely scratched the surface. So it was 18 times the level of recorded formal trade. And, if you just think about a few, apart from consumer goods, there's potential trade between India and Pakistan, dynamic value chains centered around sectors such as garments, textiles, automobiles, medical services, drugs, medical devices, and so on. You can keep thinking it only limited by one's imagination. The second point on the big picture is that trade is a low investment strategy for the business sector. It doesn't really require too much commitment on the part of business people. You export, you get paid, compared to, say, exporting on trade in services or physical investment. So it's a good area to focus on. And this goes back to what, Amita, you said, in terms of its potential to create a virtuous cycle of trade, more trade, and peace. Okay. Now, let me get to the point that was raised by Tisha and the organizers, the impact. The virtual suspension of trade in 2019 was imposed on an already low level of commerce happening, and it has created fundamental hardship among stakeholders. And this is documented very well in a report by Afaq Hussain and Nikita Singla that shows, on the basis of very detailed field work, that over 9,000 families in Amritsar that were dependent on bilateral trade were directly affected by these disruptions. Consumers suffered. For example, the prices of retail prices of rock salt in Amritsar are more than doubled. Similarly, the LOC trade across in Jammu and Kashmir, 900 families were directly affected. So, and similar losses can be affected in Pakistan. Now, some people might say, well, yes, but trade can be substituted, can it not? But I say it cannot, because there are lots of people that are not very mobile, either in location or in skills. So that's for example, those that work on the border will find poor alternate jobs. For exporters also, it's very difficult to find alternate markets for their products, and so on. So, some might say, again, I'm trying to anticipate questions that might be raised. They might say some exporters can find informal trade route, right? Again, BRIEF has done some recent work on this. But for thousands of, and Nisha and others have done work on this earlier, for thousands of supplementary workers and their families, there is no trade work, even if the exporters can find alternative buyers. What about those who directly work, on trade for, people are not so easily fungible, laborers, transporters, and so on. They are not the fungible. So impact is very significant. And the counterfactual in what could have been is beyond the charts, or as my former supervisor used to say, is off the screen. So let me get to another set of issues, is to resuming trade. What are the steps that can be taken to resume trade? And I have here focused on the what. And here, it could be that, well, we start with some of the lower hanging fruit, that you resume cross LOC trade and try to raise it to a different level. That means take it out from some of the restricted conditions that have previously prevailed on it, so as to sustain relationships. And there have always been concerns about transparency of such trade in the past. And this should be addressed. And if the talks resume, I would submit, talks between India and Pakistan do resume, a general principle would be the following: as the larger and relatively more advanced country, India should allow Pakistan more time to adjust. And that is the liberalization should be asymmetric. And indeed, that has been the pattern between India and Pakistan. Historically, it has been the pattern between India and all the other countries in the region, that India has provided early harvest to its neighboring countries. And indeed, that is the way it should be as the more sophisticated and advanced country in the region. Then we can foresee some sort of orderly process of liberalization, assuming that trade talks do resume, based on agreements that many in this room would know very well, that based on agreements that were reached in 2012. We should not, this is one point I want to reiterate, we should not begin on the basis of the pre-2019 regime, because that was not based on an MFN type of situation, the most favored nation clause. We should begin on tariff-based trade. So we should go back to tariff-based trade. So I think there, I have made some suggestions in writing in my writings recently, and we can come back to details later if needed in terms of how a more MFN-based trade regime should prevail. But I will not spend more time on that. I will, we can come back to it if needed. I do want to focus on a last couple of points is on the how, because I think that's critical, right? The what I think people do talk about a lot, but I think as Amita also raised, is the how is absolutely critical. Who bells the cat? How do you get the parties back to the negotiating table? So I think here I have a few points to raise in terms of the how. And I think the first point here is that there are naysayers, we know, on both sides. There are a lot of naysayers, right? Who say that trade cannot be done with hostile neighbors with malicious intent. And to them, I would say trade is not a reward. Trade is not charity. It is a mutually beneficial exchange. You are not rewarding anyone by trading. You are rewarding the often poor people who are involved in such trade on both sides, as well as consumers. So this is the first point in the political narrative, that it is not a reward. As people have often said to me that, we don't reward people who indulge in, and this is on both sides now, post-Pulwama and post-Article 370. But yes, so I want to say trade is not a reward. That political dialogue can proceed along with trade, as Amita pointed out very well. Second point in the political narrative in the how is that both economies, both India, Pakistan, every country in the world has taken a huge hit from COVID, right? So this opens some political space for a trade dialogue if people are in the mindset to take that step. Leaders can say that the goal is to create jobs for their own people, right? We're not concerned about the economy across the border. Our foremost objective is to create jobs for our own people, and trading with the neighbor, those 9,000 families and far more if one talks of a broader impact in Amritsar and so on. They are the ones who are at the heart of our concern. So sell the narrative, the political narrative in the name of the people. The fourth point here on the how is keep finding and expanding the politically acceptable incremental measures here, because we know that it is the incremental measures that will, which are almost below the radar that we need to expand on first, such as the Kartarpur initiative. The treatment of Pakistani patients in Indian hospitals, that's still going on, and we have some very good examples of that. We can have virtual and hopefully soon get real student exchanges, right? Right now we can do that at the virtual level. Hopefully in the near future, post-COVID, we can have that at the real level and keep doing things like that. And the fifth point in the how is make sure that the transcripts and the recordings of dialogues such as this, the Chow dialogues, get to the decision makers, they reach the powers that be. The final point on my side for now would be to bring in Afghanistan into this space, because I think there is a very important point here, and it speaks to the India-Pakistan space, but it is important to bring in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has long, and I'm sure Mr. Shinwari will speak to this, but Afghanistan has long demanded that Pakistan allow it to import Indian goods via the Wagah-Atari border, but this is currently not permitted. Currently, it can export to India via the border, but it cannot import. Its trucks go back empty. So in the spirit of a COVID détente, could Pakistan be persuaded to allow Afghan trucks to take back Indian goods? And to address its domestic constituencies, Pakistan could insist that the import load be no more than the export load, at least to begin with. Even going this point, Pakistan can earn enormous goodwill from Afghanistan and even from India. And I'm sure this would be, a massive step, even though, and it also addresses another issue, that Pakistan's falling trade with Afghanistan. So there is a lot for Pakistan in this measure. It is not a one-way street, apart from the transit revenue that it would get. Afghanistan is exploring alternative routes to trade with India. There is the air route, which has been growing, and there is also the alternative route via Chabahar port in Iran. So Pakistan can render itself more important in that bilateral trade between India and Pakistan, which will happen whether or not it facilitates it. So it can become more important in that and can become an important player and earn enormous goodwill in the bargain. So it is a win-win situation. That's why I think bringing in Afghanistan into the India-Pakistan space is very important. And my final point, Amita, on this before I hand it back to you would be that yes, all of us would not be in this India-Pakistan space were we not optimists, right? Earlier, even with even bigger provocations than Pulwama, trade between the two countries was not suspended. So we can only hope that that both countries go back to the kind of uninterruptibility and realize that how important trade is, and that trade should not be used as a political weapon. As you rightly pointed out, there are many examples in East Asia. There is the formation of the EU. There is the China-Taiwan trade. There is the India-China trade, for God's sake, as an example of trade not being used politically. So keep doing your political stuff while trade goes on. And who knows, trade may even help open the political space if it is allowed to. Thank you very much.
I think you're on mute, Professor Batra.
Yeah. Thank you, Sanjay. I think some very useful and very practical suggestions that have been made. And one of these where you say, that we must make sure that the output as far as this dialogue is concerned must reach the decision makers. I think that's very important, how we formulate these and take them and, kind of take them towards actual realization. I think will prove to be, will make this dialogue a very useful forum for the future as well. Also, the inclusion of Afghanistan and the importance that lies therein of Pakistan, I think weaving these two together makes it more relevant as far as Pakistan is concerned to consider the return movement as far as goods from India to Afghanistan are concerned. I think the other points we'll come back to later, but I think from this point, I'd like to move on to Mr. Muzammil Shinwari, former Deputy Commerce Minister of Afghanistan, to give his perspective on the issues raised today. Mr. Shinwari.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to the CSDR for inviting me to this program. I think it's the timing of this thing, like bringing Afghanistan, is quite important because right now Afghanistan is renegotiating Afghanistan-Pakistan Transit Trade Agreement, which is in which one of the major thing is access to India. Fortunately, I led Afghanistan-Pakistan Transit Trade Agreement negotiation back in 2009, 2010. It took 1 year to negotiate, but at the end, again, we were not able to reach an agreement on Wagah corridor to have access, full access to India, especially importing from India. So I will talk on that, and beside that, the regional importance is quite important. We have to look to it, and I will look to it completely different from different perspective, because I serve in the government. I work with the relevant ministries, relevant actors in the government, and now coming out and working in the civil society and looking at it from different perspective. So I think first looking to the potential of South Asia, greater South Asia, I will include Afghanistan as well in South Asia. Like 1/4 of the total world population is living in that area. But look at us, we are the least integrated region, in all over the world. Afghanistan is having problem with Pakistan. Pakistan is having problem with India. Pakistan is having problem with Bangladesh. Bangladesh is having problem with other. So, all of them got together. And the other, quite negative thing is that when we are looking to the top trading partner, in our region, none of our neighbors are our top trading partner, except for Afghanistan, which is Pakistan. But for other country, it's not their neighboring country. That is also quite strange. By having such potential, like the way overall development took place in South Asia, like if you look to IT, if you look to the overall services sector, it's emerged significantly. Even the world is utilizing South Asian expertise. I remember visiting, the Boeing production, sites and all those things in Washington State. And they said around 50 to 60% of the workers there from India. So, it's a huge thing when, that was something back in 2009. So I don't know what exact figure right now. So this is quite huge. Like if you go to the technology side, for example, the head of Google is from India. But what happened to our region here in South Asia, that is completely different. Then linking South Asia to the Central Asia, Afghanistan and Pakistan is becoming quite important. Afghanistan plus Central Asia, it's untouched market, where all those things can be exported to the Central Asia. In return, because it's energy rich, the mineral resources are there, raw material for anything can be come back to South Asia. So I think the overall connection and regional economic connectivity between South Asia and Central Asia, where Pakistan and Afghanistan are playing an important role, I think that can change the overall the economic situation of the whole region. I will consider it as a revolution if we manage to open Wagah corridor and have trade from India or overall South Asia to Central Asia through Pakistan. But there are also some back step which is somehow hurting the overall regional integration. Back in 1985, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation was established. But unfortunately, for the last 5 to 6 years, it somehow did. Nothing is moving on. Pakistan is on one side trying to have a hold of Afghanistan and Central Asia, in a way creating a kind of sub-region. In India, on the other side, they're moving towards the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, BIMSTEC. In the focus, most of the India focus is on BIMSTEC area, where you have 5 SAARC countries plus Myanmar and Thailand. But the focus of India is shifting on that side, and Pakistan is shifting on that side. It's putting a big division again in the overall region. And that is leading us to somehow disconnection or discontinuity of the regional cooperation that we had. I know that SAARC was not fully functional. I know, but there were several platforms that you can sit, you can discuss, you can talk. You had head of the states meetings used to have every year. That was a platform to communicate, to negotiate, to work. You had the SAFTA ministerial meeting. That was one of the major things that, I would consider it one of the biggest achievement in the overall South Asian relation, that we managed to have the South Asia Free Trade Area Agreement trade. Then we had SATIS, the Trade and Services Agreement. That was the 2 major milestones we had in our relation. But what's going on? how it's continuing and what's happening to that. So that is also a question. And we are losing that opportunity. And someone else is getting that opportunity, grabbing that opportunity. And it's also a regional power. We are looking to China. China is now in Sri Lanka. China is entering to Iran. They're having big deals. China is in Afghanistan. China is in Pakistan. You know, that will completely, because the South Asia, overall South Asia, they will lose resources as well as economic opportunity, because the resources will go also to China, because major Chinese companies, they're getting that contracts, especially when we look to Afghanistan, to Central Asia, to Kazakhstan, they're involved in Turkmenistan, they're involved in Tajikistan. They're getting the access to the mineral resources and to raw materials. And then economic opportunity for them is that through their production, through their products, they can easily access or capture the market of South Asia, Central Asia. And there somehow they penetrated to South Asia. Like in Sri Lanka, you are having that, they have complete dominance. So that is also a kind of, you know, opportunities that we are losing in South Asia. If we work to collectively, that can be also a positive kind of competition will be developed in the regional powers. So that's we are facing. Now, I mentioned about two things. Now, there is also, I don't know, my perception, especially by working in the government and outside the government and looking to overall environment, there is an intentional or unintentional, you know, division or regrouping of the regional blocks. As I talk about BIMSTEC, you know, there is a kind of now working that Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Central Asia become another, you know, regional group. BIMSTEC area is becoming another regional group. And that was also pushed for a kind of negative competition in the region. Like Pakistan, by joining the Central Asian Regional Economic Cooperation, the CAREC mechanism. CAREC, we know that it's full of the projects, it's full of the fundings, it's coming, you know, the CAREC 5 corridors, especially corridor 5 and 6, it's coming now linking all the way to Gwadar and Karachi. So it's linking, you know, Central Asia with Pakistan. In a way, that things is developing. You know, that is also having impact on overall what now, just I would touch briefly that on the peace negotiation of Afghanistan as well. You know, this thing is becoming a kind of, you know, completely different. So we have to look at that from the South Asian perspective. I remember, maybe Dr. Sanjay can also later on comment on that. Back in 2015, there was a kind of push from the World Bank offices in Islamabad. You know, when I said that regrouping of the regional connectivity, there was a push from the World Bank office in Islamabad to have a kind of regrouping of that Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Central Asia overall linkages. Now, when looking to current situation, you know, I remember at that time I was in the government and I represented Afghanistan Ministry of Commerce in that meeting. So now I think is that what they were pushing 2015, now they're somehow getting that result to move ahead with that. Like Afghanistan is becoming quite important because for Central Asia and South Asia, bridge is Afghanistan, even for Pakistan. But Pakistan is somehow becoming a bridge between us and the remaining, you know, the overall South Asia, mainly India. We are pushing for that, and we are renegotiating APTA, and one of the major items is that full access through WAGA. That means our export should go, and we should import as well back from India. That will be a sticking point. That will be a problematic point, and that's something I don't think it will be solved that quickly, but it will take time. My proposal for Afghanistan was that, and also for Pakistan, that, okay, if you cannot have full access at once, give it gradual access. Like if you can trade through WAGA, I was just noticing the figures, like in 2019-20, which was the toughest year in terms of relation between India and Pakistan, you know, through WAGA, only through WAGA, there was 530 crore of trade. So, you know, if you can do that, whether it's less, I know it's much less from the potential that they got, but you are doing that. So if you're doing that, you can increase that. And you can allow the similar kind of thing for Afghanistan. I asked for a national treatment. I said, okay, whatever you do through WAGA, allow us to do the same thing, or whatever number you import, allow us, access to import such numbers of product from India to Afghanistan. So that was the second proposal that we put, that we can move ahead with that. So now we will look to the government, both government, how they can negotiate that. But I think that is the most important thing that we should work on that. How we can address these problems, I think my suggestion will be, many people might not agree, but my suggestion will be that the resumption of SAARC activities, it's quite important. That is something I think we need to work, head of states meeting, SAFTA ministerial meeting, foreign ministers meeting. That is paving a platform that we can talk, at least we can sit, we can negotiate, and we can look to the future. And I think both India and Pakistan should not take the overall region as a hostage for their, whatever relation that they're having. They should come out of, they should look to the broader initiative. They managed to sit together for the COVID or fighting COVID, the South Asian leaders. They had the teleconference. They can have similar kind of arrangement on the trade and economic, especially in post-COVID era, where our region is suffering from, the overall economic disaster that we face in last 1 year. But at the same time, the poverty rate is quite high in our region. So I think we should work on that. I will conclude by one statement I remember from the former Commerce Minister of India, and who was also a prominent leader of the Congress Party, Anand Sharma. I participated in the Business Leader Conference of SAARC back in 2013. And in that meeting, he was telling the Pakistan Commerce Minister at that time, Khurram Dastagir, that look, Khurram Mia, in a typical, like look, Khurram Mia, that we have to take some courageous decision in order to make the regional economic connectivity possible. And he said, once we make that possible, we should have a road trip. And then we should have a breakfast in Delhi, lunch in Lahore, and dinner in Kabul. And by that, we will be serving our generation and also our children. So I will stop here. If there is any question, I'll be happy to answer it.
Thank you, Mr. Shinwari. I think, yes, we all wish for that kind of a road trip, and I wish we could all take that. I think you bring two very important points, which I'd like to highlight before I move on to the next panelist, which is one, the institutional aspect, of the revival of SAARC and the role that the institutions can play, in taking forward the idea of trade, economic integration in any region. I think this has been very important, both in the case of EU as well as in the case of ASEAN. Successful regions have seen the role of institutions, That's having said that, though I think I'd like to also put forward the other view, that one may not necessarily need a formal agreement to have, large-scale trade either, So while one should be working towards formal agreements, I don't think the agreements by themselves should, or lack of that, should stop countries from trading with each other, These things have to be worked out. I think we need to look at it from both sides, The other thing in terms of sub-regionalism as competing and probably being negative in the region, again, there could be two views. We've seen sub-regionalism in case of Europe, having contributed actually to the enlargement as far as the European Union is concerned, The cost of the benefits of accession, that's the smaller regions or smaller integrated sub-regional organizations realize, and then become a part of the larger whole. I think those are also very important examples and, kind of ways and means to the enlargement or to carry forward the process in a region as a whole, But I think these are very, very important points coming from Afghanistan, the relevance as far as this country is concerned to trade in the region for its own benefit and for the benefit of South Asia. Also in terms of connectivity as far as Central Asia is concerned, you highlight the aspects as far as corridors are concerned. Again, I think these are very, very important means to, larger benefits to any region's population. I would now go on to Mr. Uzair Yunus, who's Senior Fellow of Senior Fellow of Atlanta Council and host of Pakistanomy podcast, Pakistan Economy, I guess, short for that. And over to you, Mr. Yunus.
Thank you, Professor Batra, and I will, thank you for having me for this discussion. I'll build upon what Dr. Kathuria and Mr. Shinwari initially talked about. But before I do that, I'll just share something I saw while researching for this talk earlier this weekend, which was a clip from 1978, which was when Ziaul Haq was the ruler in Pakistan. And if I believe I recall correctly, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the external affairs minister, and a proposal had been sent to Rawalpindi talking about a trade corridor between Pakistan, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And here we are some 40 plus years later, still trying to make that, into a reality. As Shinwari Saab said, the dream of connecting Kabul to Dhaka and Kathmandu via Peshawar, Lahore, and Delhi remains a pipe dream. And in fact, I would argue that compared to 1978, it is, even a bigger challenge today. But I think it is something that we are optimists and should draw attention to the fact that countries and regions, despite hostilities, can and do and should trade. And the biggest example, at least for me in the region, is China and Taiwan. And some data that I would like participants to bear in mind is that from 1991 to February 2019, there were about 43,000 investment deals that totaled about $180 billion between China and Taiwan, despite all the issues in that relationship. And cross-strait trade reached or crossed $150 billion a year. So I think there is huge potential. Over 3 million people cross the strait every year, and that people-to-people linkages, continues to make the trade grow and investment deals flow in the region. And I think South Asia as a region and people in South Asia need to consider what they're losing out because of where they are today. I think the issue at hand, and we can talk about regional tensions and everything else, but the way I see it in terms of particularly India and Pakistan, and to an extent even Afghanistan, is that what's missing from the argument is the argument for consumer and producer welfare. And what we're not recognizing or not fully trying to make the argument for is that the benefit of the status quo, or the beneficiaries of the status quo, are trading groups and lobbies in all countries that benefit by extracting consumer welfare. And I'll give you a few examples of that. The first one that came to my mind was demonetization in India, when prices of fresh produce collapsed in Punjab and other parts of the country. During that point in time, prices for tomatoes, for example, on the Pakistani side of Punjab were skyrocketing. Trade was not fully liberalized, things could not move through. And so who ended up losing out? It was the producer and the farmer on the Indian side and the consumer on the Pakistani side. Today, as we speak, Pakistan's textile manufacturing industry is coming back and growing rapidly from where it was a year or 2 years ago. But Pakistan's cotton output has declined substantially over the years. It's importing more and more cotton, but that cotton, rather than coming in through the border and the line of control, it's coming through Karachi and then being transported north into Faisalabad and other textile producing towns. Again, that's a loss of consumer and producer welfare, that the cost of doing business is going up. On the Afghan front, it is known that Pakistani wheat is routinely smuggled into Afghanistan, causing price increases in Pakistan, benefiting hoarders, and then Pakistan has to import wheat. The same thing happens on the Iranian side, and Iranian oil and petroleum flows in and is smuggled. And again, that benefits those in power, those close to power, and those that have made an industry out of smuggling or through the informal trade channels. And I think what we need to start arguing for is what is the benefit to the consumers and to the citizens of each country by having greater and greater trade flows. And I would argue that there are 3 points to be made in terms of, to the naysayers, as Dr. Kathuria earlier mentioned. The first is strategic. South Asia as a region is going to be severely and is already being severely impacted by climate change and water security challenges. It is going to impact its bread baskets. And increasing trade flows and building linkages in agricultural markets is important to have the lessons learned and the technology flow east to west to make sure that the region as a whole collaborates and cooperates to move things forward. Otherwise, everyone loses out. The second is demographic. Mr. Shinwari talked about the sub-regions between Pakistan trying to do Afghanistan and Central Asia, India trying to do BIMSTEC or RCEP, which it walked away from. It's a different situation. But the demographic historical trade routes in sort of the northern subcontinent have always been east-west. And that for Pakistan is important to have that connectivity because it has invested significantly in north-south connectivity through China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. But to bring in the dollar flows or to bring in the revenues that make these investments profitable in the long term, it needs to have east-west connectivity because that is the only way you will earn the dollars needed to pay back the investments that you, or the loans that you've taken out for these projects. For India, it is also important because the population centers of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar and others, where there is a demographic dividend, it's very different than South India, which can look east. Needs that connectivity to realize the potential of that demographic dividend. Otherwise, it is at risk of that becoming a demographic ticking time bomb. And again, to take advantage for both Pakistan and India of the demographic and cultural ties, you need to have east-west connectivity. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, there is the consumer argument to be made here. And the consumer argument goes to everything from vaccine rollouts. You see India making a big play for vaccine diplomacy. Pakistan has resisted that effort, and bringing in Indian vaccines has already been a challenge and is still being debated in the country. But it is bigger than that. And the argument that we need to look at is what are some quick wins that we can invest in to make sure that there are these islands of success in the trade relationship, whether it is Afghanistan and India through Pakistan or Pakistan and India, or Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Central Asia and beyond to grow. And I believe that the first place to build that on is the Kartarpur corridor. I fully agree with Dr. Kathuria that building on that relationship or that flow of people can allow us, within the context of the current relationship, within where both countries, India and Pakistan, have cornered themselves into a box with their rhetoric and their actions, to do things below the radar. I humbly disagree with Mr. Shinwari where he argues that, we need to have SARC meetings and head of state engagement. I think that's the wrong approach. And it's the wrong approach because by raising the level of the engagement, in terms of resuming trade ties, you actually raise the risk of everything falling down like a pack of cards once again when some untoward incident happens in India or in Pakistan or in Kashmir or what have you. And if we do things below the radar and start building these linkages in a way that connect local communities over time, then we can build momentum to make sure that if something happens in the next few months or years, that those ties are strong enough to resist the effort. And I think that is a very important thing to consider. Finally, I will say that from my perspective, I am optimist, but cautiously optimistic on this front. And there are two reasons for that on the India-Pakistan side. The first is if you look at sort of what's going on in India itself. I mentioned RCEP. India was negotiating RCEP to look eastwards for a number of years, but walked away. I argued that that is because of the power of its own internal trading lobbies and status quo actors that forced that decision of the government. That it's a powerful base in the BJP. And we see that sort of, playing out in other areas as well. You have the e-commerce policy area where liberalization occurred, and now there's talk of, changing the laws to, again, benefit domestic actors. There are tariff and non-tariff barriers being raised. So I think that inward insular looking idea, in areas where it actually is an easier decision to make on the Eastern front is not happening. So how do things move forward with Pakistan remains a question mark. And then in Pakistan, where the government has tried to rationalize import tariffs and duties to allow, some of the issues to go away, traders are still a very powerful lobby. And these trader groups have resisted efforts to formalize and document their sales and their transactions over the years, whether it's related to Pakistan-Afghanistan trade or whether it's related to internal trade or imports coming in from elsewhere. And that continues to this day. And the reason that continues is because, like India, traders, particularly in Punjab, are a very powerful lobby, and a weak coalition government that is, trying to get through its 5 years in power cannot afford to rattle the cage, and and that reduces the space it has to sort of move forward on things like that. Pakistan, I think, will continue making the argument that it wants to have a geoeconomic connectivity to Central Asia via Afghanistan and move forward on that. I think on the India front, there will not be a whole lot of progress for the foreseeable future. But I think where the opportunity lies, again, on the India side is building on Kartarpur, doing things below the radar, and trying to find a way to connect communities. And I'll just stop there and happy to take more questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yunus. I think, again, this is what resonates through the panel. Incremental, small narrative for all, win-win narrative for communities and people at large, I think those are important ways of taking forward, trade integration, trade as such in the region. The second aspect, I think, which I'd like to highlight before I go on to, in fact, when I go on to Nisha, is the aspect of, lobbies and those who make revenue and profit out of smuggling, informal trade, third country trade, the aspects that I think we couldn't have had a better person to talk about, We next have Nisha Taneja, our next expert, who talks about or takes up these issues and brings forth her views. Nisha, over to you.
Thanks so much, Amita. Pleasure to be here on this panel. And I must say, I thoroughly enjoyed myself listening to all the other speakers. It was really very nice. I would like to thank CSDR for taking this initiative in these very difficult times and to keep the track to dialogue going, because very few people are doing that at the moment. So I think that's an excellent initiative. Now, all the panelists have talked about the impact of the trade impasse, but let me just mention a couple of things that I would like to add to what has already been said. One is that there is a huge cost of non-cooperation. And there's a Commerce Ministry study which actually estimates the cost of non-cooperation. And this is estimated to be $2.7 billion per annum for Pakistan. And for India, it's estimated to be $25 billion. And, also, I think there's the loss of employment. There's an estimate for that also, which is that it's around 2.85 lakh jobs in India, which are lost because they're supported by exports to Pakistan. So, so that's the kind of losses that we're talking about when we're not trading with each other. Of course, the other panelists have mentioned about, the value chains getting disrupted and industries on both sides getting disrupted, not only those industries which are export oriented, but also those which are catering to the domestic market. For instance, the pharmaceutical industry in Pakistan actually mostly caters to the domestic market, but it relies on India for import of the raw material for pharmaceuticals. The other thing that I'd like to talk about is cross-LOC trade. And here, I think studies by BRIEF and CRID have pointed out that, there have been huge losses to communities on both sides of the border. What's important to remember is that the LOC trade was actually started as a CBM, measure. And, and this was actually beginning to acquire a more formal nature, and business chambers were organizing themselves to take care of trade-related activities, and they were taking on the responsibility of having an interface with government agencies and different departments. In fact, the discussion was deepening on getting a better understanding of the nitty-gritties of formalizing trade, cross-LOC trade. But with trade coming to a standstill, not only has the formalization process stopped, but the benefits of CBM have also been lost. So, I think that's been the impact on LOC trade. Then, of course, I think others have also mentioned about informal trade. And there is no doubt that that this impasse has been, has led to an increase in informal trade. And this, according to some experts, is now increasing enormously. And what's happening is that since the informal trade channel has been active for several decades, and it's a very well-functioning mechanism, it offers a ready alternative to traders who wish to trade in a highly restrictive environment. And even though land borders are now more guarded, trade through third countries such as Dubai would have definitely picked up. And what keeps this trade going is strong ethnic ties, which have facilitated informal trade for decades. Organizers of informal trade, largely based in Dubai and other countries also, third countries, they've ensured that goods are delivered and payments are made. And in fact, the informal traders have actually devised parallel institutional mechanisms for contract enforcement and dispute settlement. And they've actually developed efficient ways of obtaining information on what has to be traded and how much has to be traded. They've put in place their own risk mitigating mechanisms, which might, actually emanate from this transacting environment. So there is this whole, institutionalization of informal trade, which is only going to get stronger. Next, I would like to talk about what the two countries, how the two countries can resume trade and what are the challenges for trade resumption. Now, history tells us that just anything is possible when it comes to India-Pakistan trade. We've seen times when trade has stopped completely and then resumed with a positive list. Trade stopped for 9 years between 65 and 73, and then it restarted in a limited positive list. And then during 2001 and 2004, trade stopped partially as there was a ban on land-based trade. On the other hand, we have instances such as the Samjhauta blasts and the Mumbai blasts, and no negative trade measures were adopted. So with this in mind, we can discuss three possible scenarios. The first is that there is a status quo, which means that the ban continues as it is. Second is that both countries initiate a positive list. And the third is that we begin at the level at which we were when the two countries imposed the ban. So how would these three scenarios pan out? So if the ban continues, then the two countries can still undertake some measures. And one way would be to engage in building infrastructure. And one of the best suggestions was actually given by Mr. Pradeep Sehgal when he suggested that why don't we actually start a containerized rail route between Amritsar and seaports like JNPT, because we're opening new avenues for the people in Punjab. And as and when the trade talks open up, the same infrastructure can be used to connect with Pakistan. And building infrastructure on one side also then puts pressure on the other side to build infrastructure. And the other thing that's very important is to continue with the track 2 dialogue, and governments, because governments are interested in gathering information, and this is their only source of information in a time like this. So particularly when there is no official dialogue, track 2 really comes to the forefront. Now, in the second scenario, learning from history, the two countries can start on a short positive list, and then this can be expanded gradually. And the third scenario is that we resume from where we left, which really means that we take forward the unfinished agenda, and which means that we remove all negative lists, we address the non-tariff barriers, we liberalize visas, investments, and we remove barriers to trade and services as well. So why is it important to resume trade? I think India and Pakistan are example. This pair is actually an example of perhaps one of the most restrictive trade environments in the world. And it is in such sharp contrast to global developments. Even though we are seeing spells of protectionism, there is no doubt that regional trade agreements have actually continued to flourish, and there are different and newer formations which are taking place and which are taking on board and which is actually in the face of the fourth industrial revolution. An example of such a treatment is the CPTPP, which which has a very wide scope, and it's a very forward-looking agreement. And then we have the APEC connectivity blueprint, and here we have South Asia, which continues to be one of the least integrated regions in the world. And one of the key reasons, of course, is the impasse between India and Pakistan. So there is so much at stake, and we are getting ourselves disconnected with the rest of the world. And like Mr. Shinwari was pointing out, that we have a wave which is running eastward, driven by India, and there is a wave running westward, driven by Pakistan. And the two regions are, the divide is only increasing between the two regions. And imagine the gains that would accrue to the entire East and West if India and Pakistan were to reconnect. So that's the kind of gain that we're talking about, were India and Pakistan to open up trade. My last point on Afghanistan and the role that Afghanistan can play right now. I think the APTA agreement is actually really a very, very, it's providing a good opportunity and a window for India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan to engage. And in whatever small way this can, this can be leveraged, it would have huge gains for all the three countries and for the region at large. And while very good suggestions have come up, both by Mr. Shinwari and by Sanjay, that one of if we have to take a small measure like allowing trade from India to Afghanistan through Pakistan in an equal measure, as both export and import could be of equal value, I would actually make it even a smaller step than that also, which is that you allow simply one or two items to be exported from India to Afghanistan. And these items, but the care has to be taken that these are items which Pakistan is not exporting to Afghanistan, because then there is less heartburn, because we're not competing with Pakistan, and at the same time we're opening the window. So Pakistan, the argument that Afghanistan can use in its favor is that, look, Pakistan is not exporting to Afghanistan, and therefore we are not blocking your market, but we need this item, and therefore we want access in these couple of items from India. But once the door opens, then you can keep adding on gradually. But maybe the starting point has to be such that it takes into account sensitivity on Pakistan's side. With that, I'd like to say thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. Thank you so much, Amita, and over to you.
Thank you, Nisha, for touching on so many aspects and giving those three alternative scenarios, which we can start from, at least thinking. And also towards the end, what you talk about as far as Afghanistan and the APTA, how to kind of take that forward, in terms of small number of items, as well as being sensitive to the transit partner here. I think these are important issues. And I would also like to say, I think we've had an array of different issues that have been brought forth today by all experts and panelists today. Many of these being very practical and useful suggestions. I think we'll now move on to the participants' questions, because we have quite a few questions from the participants. Just one announcement prior to that participants may please put in their questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box, please. So do we start with the questions
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I think we'll start with the questions. I'm requesting all the attendees to please put in their questions in the Q&A box. I think we'll start with Ms. Nikita Singla. I'll bring her on board so that she can ask her question for herself. Just give me a second. Hi, Nikita. I think you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So we have Nikita here, who's done, I think, a couple of studies that she's authored, very passionate about taking forward the idea of trade integration and regional trade. I think over to you, Nikita. Yeah. So what do you have to say? Yeah, please.
Thank you, ma'am. And good evening to everybody in South Asia, and good morning, good afternoon everywhere else. So I think firstly, I would like to congratulate CSDR to title this as India-Pakistan and not mask it under the umbrella of South Asia as it is happening for such a long time in the region. And Dr. Batra, I have two questions and they are not directed to any particular panelist. I will let you decide. First one is on who actually takes a lead role between India and Pakistan. And as Dr. Kathuria mentioned that India should take a lead and allow Pakistan more time to adjust. But as we saw post-Pulwama, India was the first one to sort of take a negative trade action to make trade a casualty of the political differences. So how do we actually expect India to take this lead and still, I mean, if I can be blunt, take a face-saving lead with Pakistan on this matter? So that's my first question. And my second one is on border economies. And, post-Pulwama, I personally traveled to Amritsar, Dubai, Uri, and Poonch. I made several trips to these places and maybe met about 400 to 500 stakeholders in person to understand the impact of the suspension of trade. And one of the key aspects that came up both in Punjab and in Jammu and Kashmir was that since, trade becomes such an easy casualty of the political differences, how do we start insulating the border economies from India-Pakistan trade? And just a couple of weeks back, we had this discussion with the finance minister of Punjab and some of the suggestions that Dr. Taneja put up already, based on discussions with stakeholders in Amritsar, that there should be an ICD in Amritsar, there should be opening of the Patti Makhur rail link that actually opens up new opportunities for traders in Amritsar. So basically the point I'm trying to make is that the whole narrative is around insulation of border economies in the states from India-Pakistan trade. And what we are trying to discuss here is how do we create more economic interdependencies between India-Pakistan. So my question is, how do we actually align what we are trying to do at a policy level and what we are trying to do at a state level in terms of insulation of these border economies? That's it, and I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think very relevant questions. The first, I think, of course, is both interesting and relevant, and I think maybe each one can have a take on that, but I think I'd start with Sanjay first, coming from the multilateral perspective. Who do you think should take the lead here? Should it be India? Should it be Pakistan? And as Nikita puts it, a face-saving lead, which way, what step do you think can India, kind of do or undertake at this point? Yeah, over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Nikita, for those questions. In my mind, there is absolutely no doubt that India needs to take the lead. It is the norm. It has done that even with Pakistan in the past. And every large economy does the early harvest. The question is, I think, not so much the substance, where I think India will do that. Even in the pre-2019 regime, we know it was unequal. India had given MFN to Pakistan for so many years without reciprocation. So I think it's not a substantive issue, as Nikita, it's a face saving. So I think the face saving is it's more on the political side. And I think in one of my pieces, I had proposed that, there needs to be some face saving on both sides, because both countries have put some lines in the sand here. So there will need to be who's going to start this? It's almost seen as a sign of weakness, that, can we come to you and resume trade talks? So I think one option that I have suggested after some thought is that let's start with an annual certification process. Say, okay, we're going to start talks with you. We don't like you, you are a malicious neighbor, but, we realize that these are our people's welfare is at stake, and this is how we're selling it. But like the US did with China for the longest period, they had an annual certification process before China joined the WTO. They had an annual certification process for China to get certified that they will be trading with the US on MFN terms. And this went through. So every year there was some kind of bated breath in China. Will they get that annual certificate from US Congress? So I submit that both sides could have, again, as this is more face saving, could have a certification process where they go to Parliament and say, okay, we did this in the last 1 year. These are the results. These are this is how we did it. And this has been the impact. This is how much trade, how many people's lives. Nisha mentioned all those jobs are at stake on both sides. So I think there can be parliamentary questions and answers on this, and hopefully it can be recertified. So I think this can be one way to save face for both sides. I think both sides need to sell it to their domestic constituencies. And if I can just take 30 seconds to take a stab at the second one, which is more, I think it's a very important point. I think Nikita has raised. It's the political economy of trade and border trade. I mean, border trade states that are contiguous to other countries have often interests which are different from the center. The center could have, and it could be both positive and negative. We know that the example of Bengal, it has been negative with Bangladesh, right? In many ways, that dialogue. So it can be a positive force, it can also be a negative force. But to the extent that there are positive forces, in the case of the two Punjabs, there is no question that they do, they would want to trade with each other if only the centers would move forward with that. So I think it is that how do you bring the positive aspect from the states? How do you bring them more forcefully into the national dialogue? I'll stop here.
Nisha, would you like to comment on the second one, which is about the border communities and reconciling what we are actually wanting to do and what's happening on the ground,
Well, actually, I don't have. I think what I would say is that if there is an opportunity for the CBM measure to get restarted somehow, because we have to go back to the beginning now. And the beginning is that we actually restart the CBM. Whenever we start a dialogue, the CBM becomes an integral part of it. On India, Pakistan, I think about face saving and all that, I think when the timing is right or when a situation gets presented, I think all egos disappear. And maybe one possible way is that the two countries engage in a third country on the sidelines of an international summit. I think that is what may provide an opportunity for both countries to talk informally and initiate something, because then it's neutral.
Okay. I think we have an interesting question here, which is from Anubha Gupta, an MPhil student in diplomacy and disarmament. Her question to the expert that since trade is low between India and Pakistan, it is easier for both to disrupt the trade easily in case of conflict and blame it on each other. Thus, both states would want to keep the trade low so as to domestically gain through populism, Who would like to take this? Mr. Yunus? I think it's very interesting to kind of bring this, that low trade and, how conflict and trade actually go together, You have to have a certain threshold level of trade to be able to ensure interdependency and peace and so on, Or is it the other way around? It's the usual chicken and egg problem too. Does peace come first and then you move on to greater trade, greater interdependency, and then never a conflict again? Mr. Yunus?
No, I think, thank you. And I think that's a great question. And it goes, to my earlier point that there is no constituency or a big constituency for improving trade ties. And the contrast here you can look at in terms of what happened with India and China. And there's a border confrontation going on that continues to this day, but India-China trade also continues despite some hiccups because the interdependency is large enough to not want to disrupt that. On the India-Pakistan side, the incentive is actually on the other side, which is let's stop it, rattle the cages domestically gain momentum in terms of the domestic audience through populist talk and rhetoric. And that actually has a, a secondary effect that continues for a long period of time, which is that both countries now have boxed themselves in, which creates the conversation around how do you then do the face-saving maneuver. Because if you look at the rhetoric, from Islamabad and from Delhi, how do you even have the prime ministers of both countries, even after a few confidence-building measures have been moved forward, to come together and move forward on something or make a courageous decision? It just does not happen because it's very hard to back down from that rhetoric. So I think that's where building things below the radar, trying to grow things in terms of the Punjab conversation, in terms of, pharmaceuticals, textiles, picking narrow segments where there is a mutually beneficial relationship to be discovered, and growing that below the radar can reduce the incentive to engage in populist rhetoric. And I think that's the path forward that both countries must talk through.
Okay, we have Mr. Manzoor Ahmed among the participants who would like to make a few, yeah.
Professor Batra, I'll just bring him on board as a panelist.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Ahmed, you're welcome to ask your question, please. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. Somehow it was disconnected. Well, thanks very much for this initiative. And as I'm very pleased to at least virtually see some old friends like Nisha and Nikita and others. I think some excellent points have been made by all the panelists and good suggestions. And I think there's no doubt, nobody doubts about the benefits of the trade. I think the big question is how to go about it. Again, many excellent suggestions. I'd just like to focus on one. I think Mr. Shinwari suggested it going through SAARC forum. And perhaps Mr. Ozair was of the view that this might not work. But I think there is a way that it can work. Already, I think the SAARC ministerial meetings, I think that there was a virtual meeting recently of SAARC planning ministers. And then there was another one of, I think, the finance ministers meetings. And maybe this could be the SAARC secretariat, because it's currently headed by a neutral person, Secretary General, I think from Sri Lanka, and he's a very seasoned diplomat. And he could push through a few more meetings. And maybe second or third could be the trade ministers meetings. And perhaps from there on, the things could move on. Because there's another benefit that we don't, neither side needs visas, because that's a big problem. And, because there's no need for visas, so we could have other virtual meetings. Nisha has always been taking the lead in this connection, and maybe she can, once again, she has friends on all over the place, India, Pakistan, and I think she, Pakistanis trust her more than anybody else. So maybe that could be one way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So Nisha, would you like to put in a word here, given that you have friends across? And I think you can take forward this initiative of putting together a virtual meeting. I think it's important that, the virtual domain allows us, without certain formalities and without the issue of visas, and the tight restrictions that there are to visas. So can we would you want to kind of put in a word here to tell us whether we can take this opportunity and through the virtual, avenue, probably make a start somewhere?
Absolutely. In fact, I would say if there's been any positive outcome of COVID, it's been the virtual connection. And I think this is an opportunity for India and Pakistan to connect. Today, the way we are connecting with each other is all thanks to Zoom and the virtual platform, which is reopened in a way that we would never have imagined. And I think this is, the frequency of the Track 2 dialogue should go up substantially with this platform. And Manzoor, thank you for imposing so much trust in me. But I think what's very important is that both countries are sensitive to each other's concerns. And that is the only way that a dialogue can continue. And that brings to the fore. So if Pakistan is looking at what is India's sensitivity, and if India is looking at what is Pakistan's sensitivity, that is the only way to break a deadlock. And I think the track 2 dialogues need to be far, far, far more frequent. And we should be making the most of the webinar platform for engaging India and Pakistan, for a trilateral engagement between India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, for a quadrilateral between Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. So all of these, I think we should actually be leveraging through this new platform that is available to all of us today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shinwari, I see your hand raised.
Yeah.
Your point. Yes, please.
I will just tell one experience that we faced in a suggestion with that. Like in APTA meeting, especially the APTICA meeting, which is the Afghanistan-Pakistan Transit Trade Coordinating Authority, which is interpreting, amending, whatever is done, it's done through the APTICA committee. So it was not held since 2016. So the last meeting, first 6 meetings took place. I chaired all first 6 meetings, and the last one was back into February 2016. And from that till November, we didn't have that meeting. In our track 2 meetings, we always push for that both government between Afghanistan and Pakistan, that, okay, both governments should have that meeting to solve the transit problem. Now, coming to my suggestion, as CSDR is leaving the Chow Track 2 dialogue with Pakistan, I think it will be a good idea that they can put it as a recommendation and talk to their counterpart as well, that India and Pakistan, one of them should call for a commerce ministers meeting of SAARC. So I think the other all will participate at this time, especially looking to the during COVID and post-COVID overall thing. So I think that's a great idea. If that is pushed from either India or Pakistan, and I think this track 2 mechanism, it's a good one that they can push, and they put suggestions to the government to move ahead on that.
Okay, there is a brief question here, Mr. Shinwari, if you can take that too, which says, aren't Indian products less competitive in Afghanistan than Chinese and Pakistani products in today's situation of lack of trade passage? Anything that you would like to say on this?
Like if the WAGA, I will put if, because then it will be completely different when we look at the land route that we are having. WAGA is 7-hour drive from Torkham. It's 7-hour drive, 7 to 8 hour if you start from Torkham, Afghanistan border on eastern side, to linkage to WAGA. Anything coming from India through WAGA, it will be much more competitive as compared to the things are coming from Karachi, Gujranwala, any other city, far away city from Pakistan, because from Karachi, it takes 2 days to reach to Torkham, but WAGA, it takes 8 hours to reach to Torkham. So this is one thing. In one area, it was previously mentioned by Professor Nisha, that looking to what Pakistan produce, what that they're exporting to Afghanistan, what not. One of the things that Pakistan is importing from India, mostly a raw material that they needed for their processing. Once they process it, they sell it to Afghanistan. And one of the major hurdle in a linkage between Afghanistan and India, it's the Lahore Chamber of Commerce. And the reason is Lahore Chamber of Commerce, they're mostly producers that they're producing things, and they don't want similar thing going to Afghanistan. So that's why they're somehow completely opposing the transit between India and Afghanistan. Other chambers in Pakistan, and especially Federation of Chamber, Karachi Chamber, Peshawar Chamber, Quetta Chamber, they're all having this joint chamber with Afghanistan. We call it Afghanistan-Pakistan Joint Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Except for Lahore, they're out of that because they said whatever we are producing, it will have a direct impact on that in our export. But we view it completely different. If there is a mobility, if there is transit, and that one thing, it was mentioned by, I don't remember whether it was Dr. Sanjay or someone, that because Pakistan suffered a lot through by creating problem to the transit trade. Our transit trade reduced through Pakistan by the percentage, our bilateral trade reduced by the same percentage from Pakistan. And that's something we were always telling Pakistan, that if we are having goods coming through Karachi to Afghanistan, so our traders, if they find good thing in Karachi, in Lahore, Gujran, Multan, and any place, they will buy that as well, they will bring it. So if you reduce the transit, restrict the transit, it will impact the bilateral trade. And that happened. Our transit trade used to be around 3 billion US dollar, and bilateral trade was around 2.5 billion, documented one. Our transit trade came to less than 1 billion. Bilateral trade came to $800 million from 2.5 billion. By the same proportion, our transit trade through Iran increased, and bilateral trade with Iran as well increased as well. So that was the thing. And now when we are seeing from Pakistan side that we are renegotiating APTA and their acceptance to renegotiate, they also determined that that was one of the policy mistakes they did in last 10 years. So I think the competition will be there, and it will be tough competition. But again, when we are talking about open market, when we are talking about market economy, you should produce good quality goods and sell it at cheaper price. So that where you can take and capture the market.
Thank you, Mr. Shinwari. I think we are done with the questions. Before I wrap up, I think what we can do is probably in reverse order. I'll go to all the panelists and have 30 seconds, 40 seconds concluding statement from each. Nisha, starting with you, please.
Thank you, Amita. I think my only thought at the end is that the track 2 dialogue has to continue, because right now that's all we have. And we must make the most of the track 2 dialogue and think of ways and means of engaging with each other and thinking of possible solutions. There is no dearth of ideas. All we need to do is engage, get them down, and share them with our respective governments. I think that would be a huge contribution to the peace process. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Yunus?
I echo that, what Professor Taneja said, and I think what we should do is have more of these conversations and build a framework that can be shared with the government, so that if and when the door sort of marginally opens, we can ram things through it and fully open this. I think the positive of the pandemic has been that folks are engaging more and more online, and we should definitely take advantage of that and build something for the future in terms of if and when India, Pakistan begin talking to each other, what is the fastest mechanism through which trade can be improved across the region, and in particular between India and Pakistan.
Okay, Mr. Shinwari?
Again, like with the track 2, I think it's the best idea that it should continue together with track 1.5 and also 1 as well. That is one thing. The second thing I will also talk about the experience. When we were negotiating back in 2010, the APTA agreement, we couldn't agree to certain things. And that when the idea came that let's create our joint chamber, bring the private sector together, and they should discuss things, and they can put pressure on the relevant stakeholder. So my suggestion will be that, especially for improving the bilateral relation between India and Pakistan, the private sector, business community, they should sit together, because they are the people that at the end of the day, either they will be hurt by those decisions governments are making, or they will be taking advantage of that. So if they get together, if they sit together, if they discuss their problem, in Indian trader or business community, they put pressure on their Indian government, in Pakistani, they put on the Pakistani government, I think that will bring two governments together.
Okay, last word, Sanjay.
Yeah, thank you. I endorse everything that my fellow panelists have said. I think that the key question is who builds the cat? That's the $1 million question. And I think if CSDR and others. I think it's a question of, given the structures of governance in the two countries, whispering in the ears of the Prime Minister's office for creating, easy to sound out. Is there some appetite for discussion? And as Nisha said, I think World Bank has played very effectively, quiet, even unacknowledged, and that's fine with the World Bank. This international convening over a quiet breakfast of senior officials, and that has borne fruit in many instances. I can go on about that, but this can be done at an international forum where, and if officials are willing to come to, if they are there at such forums for other reasons, but the real reason being to actually convene them for having a bilateral discussion. It can be done. Mr. Shinwari would recall, actually, you jogged my mind. We were together at the Dubai meeting of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the 5 Central Asian countries, where World Bank had convened that. And this is exactly what we tried to do. Apart from the formal discussions, we were convening bilateral meetings offside, offline with that. So I think there are a lot of possibilities, but I think we all need to keep up this book, The Good Fight, and continue the narrative and tell everybody the costs and the massive foregone costs and a kind of people-centered narrative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay. I think I'm not even going to try and attempt to bring together all the points that have been made, but a huge amount that has been said today, which is very relevant, I think, to the region. I think what at the end I will say is what has been echoed around by each, which is that the greater the frequency of these meetings, I think, greater would we be able to bring together the ideas that would take forward the idea of trade integration essentially in the region, Also, I think the other important point that continue to build, I think what Mr. Yunus said, continue to build intellectual capital, I mean, we try and put that together and then take it across as and when the opportunity arises for these to be implemented. And finally, the onus on CSDR to take the entire thing forward and put it across to those who matter really, those who can really make a difference, I hand over with these words back to Tisha to, make her close the session as she would.
Thank you so much, Professor Batra. I would just like to bring this very enriching discussion. We'd had a broad range of views coming from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and a multilateral view as well for this panel. With that, I just want to bring this discussion to a close by thanking our panelists, Professor Sanjay Kathuria, Professor Nisha Taneja, Mr. Shinwari. Thank you so much for joining us from Afghanistan, and also Mr. Uzair Yunus. Your views are well appreciated. And of course, a big thank you to the chair for today, Professor Batra. Thank you for supporting us and for supporting the Chow Track dialogue. To all of you who joined in from various parts of the world, thank you for sharing your mornings, afternoons, evenings with us for this roundtable discussion. And please do join us for future CSDR initiatives. We have a Twitter handle, and please follow us on Twitter. With that, I'll bring this discussion to a close. Thank you so much, everyone. It was nice having you with us. Bye.
Yeah.